Greetings Year 12. It's time to have a look at some photography rules for our NEA coursework, and we're going to be using a term, negative space, and we're going to be using another term called rule of thirds very often during the course of this unit, and it's something that you need to really be aware of in all of your photography. So the first thing I'd like you to go and do is go and have a look at the video that I'm going to direct you to now, which is by Camber Motion. That's the YouTube channel, and the title of it is Understanding the Rule of Thirds, How to Instantly Improve Your Photos and Videos with Framing, which is a very long title. However, if you go and type those things into YouTube, you will find a very useful 5 or so minute feature on this. So go and have a look at that now, and then go and set up the rule of thirds on your iPhone or your, say, Samsung or Android device. I've just put it up here for you. So if you go for an iPhone, you go into the settings app, and then you go to camera, and then you go to grid, and then tap or swipe to turn it on. And then for Samsung, Android, or whatever Android phone you have, because it's pretty much always the same OS, and open the camera app, settings, and grid lines, and this will give you the rule of thirds, and it should look a little bit like this. Now, what it will do is give you those grid lines that were mentioned in the video. And I think I'd like to add something to the video there, is that there's two things that you would be wanting to do in the photography that you take yourself. And that is the rule of thirds, where it was pointing out that we are looking for those intersections of the horizontal and vertical lines in that sort of tic-tac-toe board that is created through the rule of thirds setting on your phone. Now, the other thing you want to have a look at is the symmetry. So with the symmetries here, we have maybe our man in the top right hand corner. We have our sort of rule of thirds in grids there, but at the same time he is really bang in the middle of the frame. That can still be useful for having a sense of balance, as this man seems to have within the frame. So symmetry can be useful. The rule of thirds can be useful because it might point out a point of interest, as the presenter was saying in the video, whereas we're maybe looking not just at the intersections, but we're looking at where there are deliberate gaps within the composition. So if we have a look on the left hand side, we have our yoga pose woman on the left there on one leg, and her leg is pretty much along that left hand side third vertical line. And that gives us a sense of the poise of our subject. And even though her knee is there balanced on that horizontal and vertical intersection, it really gives a sense of the balance and everything being in that one sort of steel place along the leg. But with that last third on the right hand side being entirely open, this would deliberately give us a negative space within which to place maybe a caption, if we were to have a caption in one of our contents pages, maybe against one of our images. Or if we had a magazine cover, then it might be that we have a little bit more space to go and put maybe a main cell line. So leaving a certain amount of space can be really important in your images. Using the rule of thirds gives a nice sense of proportion to this. Points of interest can be found where you have intersections of the horizontal and vertical lines, but sometimes just leaving the gap can be very important to create meaning, but it has to be deliberate. What you don't want in your shots is to have dead thirds that you don't know what to do with. That means that you've very poorly framed it. And if you get two lots of dead thirds, for example, if you had maybe a vertical third on the right hand side and then a horizontal whole third at the very top of a picture, and maybe someone's just hanging out in the very bottom of a picture, then that will be terrible and you'll have to recrop it after the event. Now, negative space is best exemplified by some of these very clever uses here. Now we see in the top left hand corner we have the cup, right? The cup is the object that is within frame, yet the space around the cup leaves seemingly these two faces facing each other. Negative space, it's what's left around the edges. we have in the top right hand corner our skyscrapers, carefully manipulated in Photoshop, no doubt, to create this sort of maple leaf of sky between them. Maybe this is indicating business in Canada. All right, and that's the sort of iconography and those kind of iconic images they do really like in those current affairs magazines, where they have a very tasteful use of image to create meaning both in the foreground and background. Another little logo thing I thought was rather cool was the FedEx logo, obviously a delivery service in America and in this country as well. But look at what they've carefully done with their branding. Yes, they have their purple that might indicate, here's a quick colour thing anyway, that might indicate eliteness, and their orange that might indicate energy. And they have this very modern sans serif font, but very carefully between the E and the X, there's this rightwards arrow that indicates movement and direct delivery. All right, so that very careful use of that negative space for the arrow is very meaningful. It's subtle, it's almost under the radar there, and maybe some of you won't have noticed it until I drop the penny for you. So negative space, you don't have to have these very careful uses in this very prescriptive way where there's very direct meanings created, but I want you to be aware of where there is space left around your subject that you can use for the composition of your magazine. So what I'm asking you guys to do is be very aware now of what our compositional devices are. We know that we're going to have our strap line under our masthead, we're going to have our cell lines, and we're going to have our main cell line against our cover model. And with this, we now can think about where we're going to place our cell lines against our images. So if we have a look here at these current affairs magazines, we've got a very interesting use of space amongst all three of these. If we have a look at the week on the left hand side, one might consider that the points of interest where lines meet for the rule of thirds are on Trump's face and on the gasoline canister that he is holding in the bottom left hand corner. Yet we have that slight offset to where he is within frame, so that we have this negative space up by his elbow on the left hand side for the main cell line, arsonist in chief, and then some of the sort of subline next to it. What we have there is our main cell line is not fighting with the foreground image that, even though it's drawn, is in focus, and they use the sort of blurred fiery backdrop behind him almost to indicate what he's already set fire to. But functionally that makes the white cell line stand out really, really clearly against the background. Now if we have a look at our Time magazine with Jay-Z, and that's a studio shot. You guys are going to be able to do studio shots with me, and what studio shots do is they offer very nice clear sets of negative space that's a clear backdrop against someone in the foreground. So he's sort of wearing that sort of black suit. Obviously he has black skin, but he's got that kind of grey background behind him. Now with that negative space that they're using there, they've used the masthead behind his head. And I will teach you layering in Photoshop, where we can actually chop out round our subject in the foreground and tuck the masthead behind their head. At the moment we haven't got there yet. You can have the masthead just slightly on their head or on their hairline, but that's sort of used every so often. Tends to be they will engage the audience with an intense direct address image and then have the masthead behind it, but still recognizable. And obviously something like Time magazine is such a recognizable brand in America that they don't need to always have that in front of someone, and it would ruin the composition anyway. When we have a look at the main cell line in the bottom left hand corner, the 100 most influential people, we've got it there tucked in the bottom left hand corner and using that negative space provided by the shadow on the suit. The back end of the 100 goes across his hand slightly. That's okay, you will see it sometimes go over some element of the foreground, but never the face. They don't mess with the face, and certainly not the eye line and the mouth and the nose, the centrality of the face. What's nice about that composition is that the other cell lines, the smaller ones, definitely are working with this very column-like movement in the right hand vertical third of the image, so that it's really working with the suit and it's leaving the engaging direct address image in a very symmetrical way in the front of the cover. Lastly, on the right hand side there with the New Statesman, we have this again drawn, they seem to like a drawn image with our current affairs magazines of Boris Johnson, but they're very much moved to the right with this space for the Land of Confusion main cell line in the sort of middle left of the composition. Now with that's, I mean, if you took a photo like that with that sort of negative space left on the left hand side and that was deliberate, then that's great, but you wouldn't normally take a photo of like this at a party, let's put it that way. So we are doing something that is deliberate, okay, that is deliberate. And even if you have got an image that is sort of shot centrally, think about how one might crop it in some way to give it some movement to the left or right, so that there is room for the composition of a cell line to not fight with what's in the foreground. And you can see the other cell lines that are plussing just in the bottom left hand corner there. One thing I would say about our current affairs magazines is, while I'm here, is it seems they very rarely obscure the masthead. I was looking at The Economist, they never obscure the masthead. The New Statesman, they never obscure the masthead. Time magazine can do it, and The Week rarely does it. You got a little bit of Donald Trump's hair just a fraction in front of the E, just to make it sort of even more sort of engaging and almost offensive as the man comes towards you with the fire. So that's what we're looking at here. We're looking at a very careful composition of image, where we have the deliberate leaving of thirds, a choice in the case of Jay-Z there to have deliberate symmetry, but having that negative space in which to place cell lines and main cell lines. So we can see this in some of our student work, and especially when you have things like content pages, you need to have a lot of area for a lot of those guidelines to allow the audience to read the finer print that you have there to guide them through into the book. So you can see here with our student, this would be considered maybe terribly framed if it was a shot on its own, but it uses that 2/3 of space on the left hand side to put the guidelines in. Over here on a magazine cover for a fashion magazine that someone did, you can see that we've got the space around her, but she still used maybe things like her hair and sort of cut across the hair, but never the face with the cell lines. Now, here's a task for you. I'd like you to set up the rule of thirds on your smartphone. It would be terribly useful for you for all of your shots forever with your use of your phone. And I'd like you to take 3 to 5 shots of points of interest, things like cooking and how someone might cook and prepare food, large plants in your garden, for example, and maybe a sibling looking particularly thoughtful. And the idea is that we are looking to use the rule of thirds, and we are looking to use symmetries to create a sense of what's important within frame. So I took 2 frames from our video there. You see how perhaps the focus on the child in the foreground with her older sibling in the background might indicate the joy and innocence of their childhood relationship, whereas in the bottom right hand corner with all of these baubles, it's colourful baubles suspended from the ceiling, and that focus on that really colourful blue and yellow one, this might indicate the playfulness of the room. Okay, so the idea is that we're really pointing towards what's important, what's big in frame, what's at a point of interest, and we can use that balance of those ideas to give a sense of importance and meaning, ultimately meaning ideas bubbles for the audience. Now, I'd like you to make sure that you have the focus correct on your image as well. So remember, you can tap on what you believe to be in focus on the image. Now, things like on people, eyes. If the eyes are in focus, or the bridge of the nose is in focus at that kind of smartphone level of quality, then that's going to be where you want to be. Don't be on their chin or their forehead, be on their eyes. Also, you might find that if you've got a portrait of someone, then you might have a portrait mode on your phone that really gives you that very shallow depth of field. So if you want to try and use that, but use that with the rule of thirds and giving people space to look into. Right, always imagine that if you've got someone on the left hand side of frame and they're facing to the right hand side of frame, then they are going to have almost like a talking space. If you remember from, say, GCSE, almost imagine having a speech bubble and room for a speech bubble next to them. Right, that concludes our lesson, and I would like to see these shots that I've set in the task. I'd like to see your compositions, paying attention to all those factors that we've had a look at, but the best way to send me this on Show My Homework would be to get these images and then put them in a PowerPoint document or put them in a Word document. I don't want to be sent very large digital photography files straight to my email that are going to take ages to download and just clog up my computer. All right, and I will see the composition, however small it is, on the page. I will know in about a second. All right, so it's all about composition. It's not about the size of the file. Marvelous. Hopefully I will see you over the next few weeks in our erstwhile lessons. Until then, bye bye.